Redditors who work at the ER, what's the funniest or absurd reason someone was brought in? When asking what brought him in today, he said he was arguing with his sister about the car and how much this costs, and carrying on, had to stop and ask him again, why is he here? His reasoning was he was tired of arguing with his sister and would rather be admitted to the hospital. Story 2. As a kid, my mom's ambulance stories seemed hilarious. But as an adult, I don't think I'd have the patience to tolerate so many people's bullcrap. That being said, here goes the story. They get a call that a guy has a severe nosebleed, is already feeling dizzy, losing a lot of blood, and can't stop it. Needless to say, they floor it, thinking the guy might bleed out. Get there in very short time. They ring the doorbell. A guy answers. They ask him to take them to the victim. He says they're talking to him. Not one drop of blood on the guy's face or clothes or anywhere. Cheeks all rosy. Doesn't look like he's lost a lot of blood, so they ask what the deal is. He says it's hard to explain, but he was worried they wouldn't send him an ambulance if he was honest about his symptoms, and he's in a lot of pain. My mom tells him to sit down and tell them about the symptoms while they take his blood pressure. Guy says he'll do all of that, except for the sitting down part. Now, I bet you all know where this is going. Turns out he'd been trying to convince his girlfriend to do sex. She wasn't into it, was afraid it would hurt. So the guy says, if I show you on myself, will you do it? She reluctantly said yes. So the guy lubes up a thin aluminum flashlight, 2 centimeters thick, 15 centimeters long, bends over and jams it up inside of him. He's got it good and up there, holding on to the end with 2 fingers. However, the flashlight, being cheap, wasn't machined properly in the factory, and a small burr on the rim hit his colon from the inside. So he jolts upright from the sharp pain. The lubed-up flashlight escapes his finger and gets schlepped up in him. So they put him on a stretcher, and the driver says into the radio, Ambulance 98 returning. 28-year-old male with severe constipation and foreign object inside oof him. It's a flashlight in case it matters. So, yep, you heard that right. We're bringing you a Firefly. Stand by. Story 3. Over the course of an evening, 9 teenagers were brought in by their parents for hallucinations. None of them were able to tell us what was going on, and they trickled in over about 4 hours. The substances screens were negative, but they were all pretty badly out of it. Finally, one of the siblings was able to tell us they had all been at the same party. One of the teens had talked the others into trying substances, except they were mildly poisonous ones instead of the ones you take for substances. Tripping like crazy for the night, and they had to stay in the ER until they were sobering up. It was amusing for the staff, but the parents were quite irate. Story 4. The funniest ones I've heard are the whines that call into there. I remember one about a mother freaking out about smoking her son's met, both addict. Story 5. I'm a cop and was posted at the ER on night shift once, and a woman came in because she got bit by a snake in her yard. She was panicking because of it. Her hand was really swollen. One of the nurses asked if she saw what kind of snake it was, and she said no. A couple of minutes later, these 2 boys came running in holding a snake in a Ziploc bag. They had rode their bikes from their house to the hospital to show the doctors the snake that bit this lady. Like these kids heard about what happened and went on her yard to hit the snake just to do this. It was funny and oddly heartwarming. Story 6. I got admitted to the ED after a heavy leather-bound photo album fell off the top of a freestanding wardrobe during sex and hit me. I ended up with 12 stitches and a multi-layer closure. The album in question, the woman's wedding day with her dead husband. We joked later that it was his ghost disapproving of our random horny moments. Story 7. Had a guy come in after smoking with his friends, and then he also did substances. His friends got very paranoid and he became aggressive towards them, so naturally they attacked him with a samurai sword. Story 8. Oh man, I don't work in the ER, but my dad's old girlfriend did, and he loves to tell this story. One night a guy came in with chronic hiccups. Poor guy had them for about a week, tried everything, nothing worked, and he was getting desperate. Nurses tried everything they could think of, and not even their tricks worked. They had to go back to the books and look for alternative cures. Sure enough, there was one. So they go to tell the guy. Apparently, as soon as he heard the words digital stimulation, his hiccups went away. Story 9. Girl came in saying she had a lump in her pussy. Very worried about it. Examination revealed nil abnormalities. On further questioning, her new boyfriend said he felt it during sex. It was her cervix. Story 10. Not an ER worker, but a chronically ill person who's been hospitalized and in the ER many, many times. The best one ever was a man who got his junk stuck in a toaster in the room next to me. Would not stop screaming about, "You absolutely have to save my junk." You have to. You hear a lot when separated by flimsy walls, and when a situation is so silly, even nurses can't help but pause and giggle. Never found out if it was on or not. Story 11. My mom worked in the OR and said there were so many guys who ended up there because of things they slipped and fell on. The craziest one for her was the guy who slipped and fell on a snow globe. Story 12. I didn't work in an ER but was a patient, and someone a few stalls down from me was flipping out because the pot brownie he ate was too strong. It was kind of funny. He kept saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And the nurse was like, "But you're breathing just fine." And someone else he was with said, "I told you not to eat the whole thing." Story 13. A 15-year-old kid came in because he shoved one of those mini Nerf footballs, the ones with the tail that make noise when you throw them, inside of him, and when he tried to pull it back out, the tail came off. Your body is basically a vacuum. We got it back with some long pliers. Story 14. Some dude tried to light a bottle rocket stuck inside of him. 2nd degree burns across his back. 3rd degree burns on his chocolate starfish. Poor guy couldn't even lay on his back because it was too painful. Play stupid games, win a crispy butthole. Story 15. I had someone get flown in via helicopter for having her first pleasure. Boyfriend called 911, local rural ambulance freaked out because they weren't given full story, so called in chopper due to seizure-like activity and fainting. Story 16. I've seen a guy that came because his wife put his wedding ring on his junk. We had to cut it with pliers plus cutter as the or tools could not cut through. So always wonder what is worst. Your wife found a reason to put her ring on your junk. You have a wedding ring on it and it is totally swollen. A wedding ring fits your junk. Story 17. This falls more in line with absurd than funny. Had a patient who came into the ed in a t-shirt and a small towel wrapped around his waist. I noticed in triage, the patient refused to sit down the entire time. Patient gets rushed immediately to the back. Turns out, the patient and his, so we're having a little too much fun and lodged a sex toy inside of him. The sex toy in question was one that has a suction cup on the end of it that they were using as a handle. The sex toy also had the shaft broken off, only leaving the balls. He had to be transported to a higher level of care for surgery of a perforated. The kicker? He did it again 3 months later. Story 18. For acting funny at Walmart. Dude was just taking things off shelves and putting them in the aisle. He was drunk and high on substances. But someone called the police on him and he was brought to the ER to detox. He just kept asking us for chocolate pudding, cheese curds, and French fries to eat while he channel surfed. Story 19. Volunteered in an ear for years. Kid about 12 years old came in with a slim piece of carrot stuck up his nose. Was horsing around at the dinner table, had carrot up near his nose, then snort laughed. Was far in the nose cavity. Needed an ear, nose, throat specialist to look at it. Story 20. It's mostly psychs and substances users that give you your run for your money. Some psych PT somehow smuggled a dog in through triage, past the nurses, doctors, and security into their room. It didn't come to our attention until another psych PT was playing catch with him. A 600-pound man violently trying to hear the emergency staff. It was like trying to restrain a pudgy gorilla, a man with one of those Costco-sized shampoo bottles stuck up inside of him. Then proceeded to get it out himself and then walked out. This guy wasn't on substances or a psych, just had a loose and lubed sphincter. I don't know, I've been doing this for a while. It all kind of fades into chaos. Oh, those 4 teenage boys who all took like 6 milligrams of substances apiece. And 3 of them passed out at home, and 1 was brought into the air, very sleepy, and nobody had any idea what F was wrong with him. And we couldn't get a hold of the 3 other boys he was hanging out with because they were all past the duck out. That Hey Arnold football-headed MF who made me check in 12 lint rollers and swore up and down the Portuguese were trying to steal his thoughts. That guy who was brought in for drinking and driving, he had bilateral leg lost and was driving a stick shift. Story 21. Guy came in and handed over a note saying he had a sex toy stuck inside of him. It had gone past the sphincter. My empathetic workmate asked him had he come in to get the batteries changed. Story 22. I'm not in the medical field. Had to take my husband to the ER one night. He got his junk stuck in the zipper of his jeans. We tried to solve the problem ourselves, and after 2 hours, we gave up. They gave him a shot to numb the area. It took 2 people pulling and tugging to get it free. The doctor's exact words, "It looks like you took a cheese grater to it." He wears boxer briefs now. I guarantee we were the talk of the emergency department for a long time. Story 23. My buddy was a roofer. He was hot, tarring a roof when someone knocked over the bucket of boiling hot tar. It soaked on his face. This guy, being the tough-as-nails psycho that he was, drives himself to the emergency department. Walks in calmly, the nurse sees him and gasps. So he rubs his stomach and says, "My tummy hurts." Story 24. Used to work in the ER in the Army, and we'd often get emergency surgeries sent to us from the emergency department. The most odd of all was a PFC who karate lost his junk. Yep, you read that right. He came in with a junk swollen the size of a golf ball. I was coming back from lunch and went to check the board to see what room I was going to be in when one of surgeons, who was also in my unit, swung by and told me I was going to be with him and that I'd get a kick out of this. So I follow him to the OR, scrub in, and the or nurse starts telling everyone the story that she was told by her friend in the emergency department. Apparently, the guy said that for years, when he pleasured himself, he liked to press his junk against things, and that the pressure made his pleasure better. Over the years, he tried all different ways and landed on lightly slapping his junk during pleasure. Somehow that evolved to doing light hand chops. Well, this time he did it so hard it swelled up. Didn't take long for the entire or staff to get wind of the story. The funniest part in all this was that the guy was in training to be an or tech, and it was only his third day of aid. Started it off with a bang. When he got to the portion of training where they started shadowing everyone knew him as the guy who karate lost his junk. Wish I remembered the clever name they gave him. Story 25. Bottle of hot sauce stuck up inside. It was glass, and I was so surprised it didn't shatter. He had to have emergency surgery to remove it, and you guessed it. He said he just went to sit down on his recliner and happened to sit on the hot sauce. Story 26. I was working in the emergency department when a man and his girlfriend came in. The man said that he has bruises on his junk and wants it checked out. The doc asked him, "What happened?" And his girlfriend responded saying that she gave him a HJ. The doc just gave him lube and discharged him. Story 27. I was in emergency department getting seen to after I'd fallen down the stairs and overheard some doctors talking about a guy who had a bottle of Oasis lodged inside that a bottle of Oasis has no business being near. Me and my husband then had to sit in the waiting room and wonder which of the people in there it was. It did distract me from the pain though, so there's that. Story 28. I used to work as a security guard at a local hospital. A woman came in with her son, and I overheard her tell a nurse that his junk was swollen. I wonder if the nurses or a doc gave her a crash course on how things work. Story 29. I was once in the emergency department because I climbed a tree that was apparently wrapped in poison ivy. I got completely covered, head to toe, even my boys. I had this insane white reaction on my skin that made me look like a zombie for a while. This was the most uncomfortable time of my life. It really sucked. Story 30. I don't work in AR, but I'm sure I'm more than a few stories. Most recently, I was working on my truck with a buddy, and we were unbolting body panels. I was holding a wrench on the back of bolt while he zipped the nuts off with a high-torque electric impact. One of the bolts was in a difficult spot, and the wrench slipped out of my hand, spun around, and pinned my thumb to the frame with the open end of the wrench at full speed. After running it under cold water and wrapping it with whatever we could find, I lay on his floor for a couple of hours until I got called into work. On my way to work, they called me back and said, "Never mind." It was at this point I noticed two things. My thumb was still bleeding consistently, and I was coincidentally near the hospital. May as well go in. I'm off for the day now. So I walk up to the reception desk, calm as daisies. Receptionist looks up and says, "Hi, how can I— Oh, you're bleeding." And I was like, yeah, damn thing won't stop. After soaking my hand in that sterilized water stuff to loosen off my bandaging, they removed my paper towel, electrical tape, gauze, and damn nasal strips, and gave me like 5 or 6 stitches and some proper bandages along with cleaning instructions. It still continued to bleed a little bit from under my nail for the next couple days. Nearly 10 months later, my thumbnail is almost grown back completely. Story 31. Around 2 a.m. emergency department called to let us know what they were bringing in. Age, chief complaint, etc. I picked up the phone and the paramedic was laughing so hard he said, "We'll just tell you when we get there." They wheeled in a little old lady, which could mean anything from feeling lightheaded while singing at church to crawling on the ceiling with a raging UTI. It turns out she wanted to get a rabies shot just in case, because she had been bitten by her service animal. "What kind of service animal do you have, ma'am?" "A capuchin monkey." The paramedic standing behind her was trying to hold back his laughter. He said when they went into her house to pick her up, the monkey was sitting on the couch with one arm in a bag of Doritos and the other pleasure himself. I guess he wasn't too happy about being interrupted. Story 32. Emergency department friend of mine had a house call. Some poor sod had himself a beautiful bed with round S on each corner and some alone time. He had lowered himself onto the bedpost, gotten stuck, and called an ambulance. The emergency department attempted to assist him in removing the post from inside, but ultimately couldn't. They make the call that they need to cut the bed down and transport him to the hospital for surgery with the one post still inside him. They have to use a saw to cut the bedpost. This caused a lot of vibrations, and he into an employer emergency department face. Poor guy couldn't help it, but it's a very visceral lesson in protective eyewear. Story 33. 20-something-year-old female came to the emergency department around 2 a.m. for pain after sex. She said her boyfriend was big, and he hit something. Her boyfriend shows up shortly after and was a fellow with dwarfism and an afro nearly as tall as his overall height. He walked in strutting for sure. He must have been able to lean on his Johnson like a tripod from the sound of it. Story 34. When I was a nursing student, one of my classmates had the following story happen. I was in the intensive care unit at the same hospital. Patient came in and had a vertical gunshot wound. The wound did not damage any organs and did not seem to damage anything beyond fatty tissue and skin. The patient tried to maintain that someone shot them until they were informed that if someone else shot him, it would complicate matters and a full police investigation would be mounted. Then the real story came out. Guy was trying to stuff a gun in his waistband or something and shot himself. Story 35. Not a worker, but I was in emergency department and saw it happen. A couple casually walked into the reception, talked to a nurse, and the nurse simply asked why they are there, why they skipped the line, Many whys. The guy calmly say, "We had a couple of friends over for wine and cheese, and while cutting one of the cheese, I hit my finger." The nurse, at this point, very annoyed, asked why he hit in line just for a finger hit. The guy just looked at her with the calmness of a saint. "No, you don't understand, I lost my finger," and proceeded to show his hand wrapped in a very thick towel. The nurse goes crazy and rush out to call a doctor. 3 come in, take the guy, and leave as they ask where the finger is. The girlfriend just explained the friends are coming to bring the finger. Fast forward some minutes. The nurse finally calmed down, and another couple show up. For coincidence, they go to the same nurse, or were warned by the girlfriend. The nurse, once again slightly annoyed, they skipped the line. The couple just stared at her, raised a pot, and said, "We got the finger," which the nurse quickly gets and run off once again. It all happened so fast, and it was surreal. I fear my pain caused me to see all that happened. Story 36. I'm a travel RN. While working in the emergency department for a hospital in Florida during spring break, a guy was brought in by the local cops. He was found incoherent and walking down the side of a busy local highway, eyes rolling around the room, unable to fix his gaze, obviously intoxicated but laughing and acting silly. I started my assessment. His vital signs were normal, but whenever anyone asked him a question, his only answer was, "Met. Can you tell me your name? Met. Do you know where you are? Met. Do you hurt anywhere? Met." After about 20 minutes, the MD finally walks in and asks me if I was able to find out what he took. "Met," came the answer from across the room. At this point, both of us are trying our best not to laugh. MD orders a substances screen so we can find out what he actually took. "Do you think you can pee in this cup for me?" Met. To everyone's astonishment, the substances screen came back negative for everything the lab tests for, including met. All this goes on for about 4 hours until he finally starts to come around, was able to tell us that what he actually took was substances. We gave him some more time to come around and eventually called one of his friends to come pick him up. Substances doesn't usually show up on a urine substances screen because it's metabolized within about 20 minutes of taking it. The experience happens because of a cascade of neurotransmitters in the brain set in motion by the substances that lasts for 6 hours. Story 37. Absurd and also made me want to beat someone. Busy Ed in the peak of pandemic. Amidst all the drama and very sick patients, had a 32-year-old male walk in and make a fuss for being made to wait for 2 hours because he stubbed a toe. Basically stubbed his tiny toe on a table leg and felt like the world was ending. Worst pain ever. He made such a fuss that I had to assess him and calm him down. Was his toe broken? No. Was it swollen? No. Was he in any pain now? No. Was it bleeding? No, the pain had lasted for 5 months and he had to be seen because it was the worst pain ever, doc. You can't imagine. I can imagine. Every human being stubs their toe. It sucks, and then it's fine. You can sit here until I manage my pandemic patient in respiratory failure. Talk about absurd. Still pisses me off when I think about it. Story 38. Drunk male was brought in for, yeah, you guessed it right, for drinking. There was this guy, serial alcoholic, who was binge drinking, and he fell and went to sleep. His mates, all drunk, thought he needed medical attention and brought him to hospital at 6 in the morning. There was literally nothing wrong with him. He was just sleeping. I discharged him after careful examination. Story 39. I had the whiniest French exchange student. This grown-ass man was hilarious. He legitimately woke up at like 0230 and was like, "I want a snack. I shall prepare myself some chicken." He took out some like full-on raw chicken breast and was about to make himself a whole ass meal. He went to take the knife out of the block and cut his finger open. I don't even understand how that happened. He moaned and cried and groaned with every movement or task like his life was ending. Barely needed a couple stitches. I had him rinse it off, and just rinsing it took like 7 minutes. I love the French. I also had a teenager who came in for feeling a little numb, slightly anxious, and like his heart might be beating a little too fast. Maybe slightly paranoid. My man smoked substances. We asked if he was hungry, basically gave him a cup of water and sent him home. Had a 6-year-old, and the triage note said, "Rollover MVC, motor vehicle crash." I was like, oh, I need to make sure my room has trauma supplies. I look up from my desk, and kiddo, family are walking in. Well, that's reassuring, I think to myself. Kiddo wasn't front seat in an 85 miles per hour rollover. He was driving and a tire slipped off the curb. Kid was 100% fine. Got plenty more of these. Story 40. Story I've heard over a decade ago from my mom nurse. They got a guy, trouble breathing, x-ray of lungs shows something weird. She said it looked like a massive infection or something. He went into surgery, went out that it was a tapeworm that, well, got lost. Story 41. The ambulance instructor leading my refresher course told us that one day, while they were at the station, a car pulled into their lot and some lady jumps out, either her daughter. Mom says they were at the playground when her daughter started having an asthma attack. Kid is heard wheezing the whole time and in tripod position. Hence, the mom was going to take her to the hospital. During evaluation, instructor listens to her lung fields and notes. They all sound clear. He asked another medic to take the mom inside and get her billing info. Guy looks at him funny, but ultimately complies. Once the mom is out of earshot, he looks at the girl and says, "Stop it! You're not having an asthma attack." She stops her wheezing and says, "Okay." Turns out they were at the playground, and while mom wasn't paying attention, the daughter fell of a swing and got the wind knocked out of her. When the mom did look up, she just saw her daughter in the tripod position and assumed she was having an asthma attack. The daughter, having heard her mom say that's what was happening, just went along with it and started mimicking the signs. Story 42. Not funny, but insane. Woman walked in around 4 p.m. complaining of mild neck pain. She'd been in a car accident that morning, seen by paramedics in the scene and cleared, told to go to emergency department if she got headaches or neck pain. So we put her on spinal precautions and wheel her off to x-ray. She comes back and is just chilling on her bed, still in pain but nothing major. Next minute, the head of radiology rings emergency department, literally screaming, "Don't let that woman move!" She had a C1 dislocation. Her skull had been dislocated from her first vertebrae. A single twitch, and it would have been instant death. And somehow she'd walked into emergency department hours after the accident. She was rushed to surgery and survived. Story 43. The old guy that came in one night with plastic teaspoon inserted in the eye of his junk. When he was asked why it was there, he said, "I did it for gratification. It doesn't work." He was very matter-of-fact. The nursing home said they stopped using plastic cutlery because of him and couldn't work out how he got one. Another one. Guy came in by ambulance with his mom. AMBO notes were clearly rewritten so many times because they struggled to find the right words. A and B arrived at scene. Their house guy was covered in a rash, but otherwise pretty good. The mum immediately launched into a very detailed account of how she had paid for an escort for him the night before. Details like, she pays for one every 10 days. Always a different girl, never used protection. They went to the park at 3 a.m. and rolled around in the grass, etc. The details flooded in and the guy stayed quiet. The story ended with, "This morning, he ate some mushroom risotto." Ambos immediately said this was the cause. Other symptoms pointed them this way, but thanked Mum for being so, helpful and descriptive. Story 44. My mom worked in the emergency department. She had a guy come in who stuck his junk in a vacuum cleaner hose while turned on. He couldn't get it off due to swelling and had to bring the entire hose with him. Story 45. Not a medical professional, but I was waiting in emergency department when someone came in, laying face down on a stretcher with a bowling pin rammed up their inside, and it was blunt end first. With only a couple of inches of the pin's head visible, someone had to have physically rammed it up inside. I always have wondered what circumstances led to that happening to him. Story 46. Mom worked in the emergency department, so I was meeting her for lunch. Dude was rolled in covered in fishing lures. Apparently, his buddy had put the tackle box on the dash, and when they had to slam on brakes, it flew open. He has them all over his face, down his arms, and stuck to his chest and stomach. You could see him trying not to move because any stretch of skin would pull at the barb. It was nuts. Story 47. So when I was doing my emergency department clinicals, I had to do 2 overnights in the air. Most of it was relatively uneventful, but one time, this one Hispanic dude, maybe 17, rolled up in a wheelchair, pushed by his 2 buddies. Turns out his girlfriend was giving him a BJ and her ring got caught on his junk skin. Have you ever wondered what the inside of a junk looks like? Me neither. Turns out it is incredibly smooth. The doctor stitched it up, having me cut the thread every time he tied a knot. Stitches isn't something an emergency department does, but Teach told us to do anything. The staff let us. So I cut them damn strings. The distress on that guy's face is something I will never let go. Story 48. Work colleague told me this peach. Her and some student friends were drinking and watching TV, and there was a show on that stated if you shoved one of the old-fashioned round light bulbs into your mouth, it was easy to do, but getting it out would be impossible. 2 friends tried it, and yep, the guys couldn't get the bulbs out their mouths. They went to emergency department where a pissed-off doctor ended up using a small hammer to break the bulbs and slowly extract the glass out, without hitting their mouths. After a lot of apologizing, the group left the hospital just as another group of drunk students came in the door, where 3 of them had light bulbs jammed in their mouths. Story 49. Had a guy come in at 3 a.m. because he was out of colostomy bags. We don't carry a large amount of these supplies in the emergency department. A lady came in because she said she gained weight and didn't want to. Had a guy come in because his hip grazed a side table. No bruising, no swelling, no redness. Walked into the emergency department, no gait issues. Said he thought he broke his hip. Story 50. My buddy dislocated his shoulder years ago. As a result, it tends to pop out from time to time rather easily. We were on a big group trip and came back to the hotel after a night out at the bar. Long story short, he thought he was going to come back with a lady for sexy time, but did not. Out of frustration, he punched the air. His shoulder popped out and had to go to the emergency department. Story 51. A man came in with an apparent discomfort and high fever, not really wanting to explain why. Turns out he had an 18-centimeter sex toy way far up inside of him. He had been trying to get it out by himself for days, but it had just slipped further in. Luckily, he had been able to turn it off, but most probably, it had climbed. It's way up because it had been vibrating. He had to go to surgery, and the last thing the surgeon said to him before beginning the procedure was, "Would you like me to take it out or just put in new batteries?" No laughs. Tough crowd. Story 52. 2 weeks ago, a girl came in complaining that her nipples were swollen and tender. We asked when they started feeling that way. She said it had been about 3 days. We asked if anything changed 3 days ago that she can recall. She said she got them pierced 3 days prior. Was sweet though, and obviously a tad worried. We gave her patient education, told her to visit us if the problem persists, and if she sees any infection signs to come in immediately. Story 53. I don't work in a hospital, but my profession requires me to respond to the hospital to make reports for patients who walk in with suspicious injuries, if you can only guess what I do for a living. 12-year-old kid walks to the emergency department with his friends at 2 a.m. and asks to make a report about his injury. I get there and ask him what's up and where are his parents. He said he was bit by a mouse and wants to report it. Bit by a mouse on his finger. What? Yep, he was bit by a mouse. Hospital sterilized it for him and I called his parents to come pick him up. Found out he was a runaway juvenile and was living under a bridge for the last 4 months amongst the rats and mice. Story 54. A guy came in with a sex toy up inside of him. The funny thing was, it was still going hours later and all my female colleges wanted to know what brand of batteries he was using. Story 55. My friend works in an emergency department and they get guys who have shoved peculiar things up inside, from vegetables to spray cans. Sky's the limit. The best part is that the people in the ear are so unfazed about it while the patient tries to make up the worst excuses. Story 56. Paramedic here responded to an assault. 2 brothers fighting, one had seriously wounds as we are bandaging him up. We ask why they were fighting about, well, it's May 4th, you know? So we were watching Star Wars and having some drinks. And we started getting pretty into the characters and stuff, and wound up arguing about who had the harder life growing up. And he just thinks he's so tough because he got shot in the face that time, and well, we got a fighting and he hit me on that cabinet in there. Me? Well, to be fair, it looks like he got the best of you today. Yeah, but just wait, I'm come back and put the Jedi on his ass when I get the chance. Story 57. A day after helping my roommate pull roots for an hour, I'm at work, and I feel my face swelling, as is the rest of my body. I walk into my boss's office and he says, "Go to the damn hospital right now." So of course, I drive the hour home to go to the close hospital. It's getting a little challenging to see. I walk into the waiting room and the receptionist was looking down typing something. She starts on her usual spiel and looks up and cuts out with a shriek, asking me if I can breathe. I say yes, but it's hard to see as my face has swollen both eyes shut. And that, kids, is how I got a V anti-inflammatories. Learned we had poison ivy in our yard and got an immediate escort to the back of the emergency department. Also, the longest month of my life, where I had to have my roommate duct tape socks over my hands so I wouldn't scratch myself at night. Story 58. Not me, but my best friend had a man come in with his junk stuck in a liter Mountain Dew bottle. He tried to cut the bottle off at home and nearly sliced his junk in half too. Story 59. 1. The woman who came in at about 7:30 a.m. having taken a home pregnancy test that was positive. She wanted a hospital test for confirmation and didn't feel like waiting 30 minutes to call her PCP. Then she got mad that she was waiting while actual sick. Injured people were treated before her. 2. The guy whose coworker brought him because the patient had been acting erratic in the parking lot at work. Turns out PT was high on an unknown substance they had gotten from 2 total strangers they had befriended at a bar the night before. When they sobered up, the patient was like, "I have no idea why I took substances from strangers. I was just having so much fun with them, I went along with it." Meanwhile, what the strangers gave the patient was laced with PCP, and patient was having muscle spasms so strong they cracked a tooth, and their temp was 102. This was not a young person, by the way. Story 60. Was an air tech. Was with a patient. Behind the next curtain over, I hear one of the docs interviewing a patient that came, "I'm for stomach pain." X-ray found 3 potatoes in the man's ass. Man tells him he fell in the kitchen and landed on them. Doc asks, 3 times? Another was a guy came in after a Halloween party dressed like a jockey with a pretty good laceration on his cheek. His boyfriend smacked him with the riding crop and left a cut that needed 12 stitches. Story 61. Now, I don't work at the emergency department, but my uncle is a doctor, and he had to do a residency at the ER in med school. One of the stories he would always tell is the story of a couple. A woman who had a large burn on her shoulder and a man who had multiple wounds on his junk, after much asking on his part and much dodging on theirs. It was revealed that the man was cooking breakfast while do BJ so amazing that he dropped the pan on her shoulder, which caused her to bite down. So lesson, don't duck and cook. Story 62. I work in psych, but the patient would have had to come in through the emergency department. They had been brought in because someone had come across them and become concerned they were psychotic. Nope, just turns out they were deaf. Story 63. Had a kid come in who inserted the ink part of a pen inside of him, and it was stuck. I was conducting heart research at the time and had to interview every patient that came through the emergency department. His dad, who was beyond embarrassed, forced him to tell me the whole story because I think he thought I was a doctor with my white lab coat. Because the kid was so young, he didn't know which parts of the story to exclude. So it started with, I was watching a video online where this naked woman inserted something into a guy's junk, and it looked like it felt good. After the 5-minute story and trying to hold back my laughter, all I said was, "Sorry you don't qualify for our research studies," and then walked out of his room. Story 64. The lab assistant at the college I went to use to be an air nurse, and she told us about having to remove a large pine cone from inside. Each section breaks off, so you can imagine the length of time that took. Story 65. Took a pandemic test at home, was positive, so was the kid. Wanted to see what the doctor would say to do, but on the way in, stopped and got Burger King for themselves. Story 66. My wife recently spent the night in the emergency department, not in a room, but in some strange limbo between triage, the actual emergency department, and the waiting room. I overheard a man who was being discharged asking the nurses a few questions. From the sounds of it, he was in the emergency department because he had used a Q-tip and a little bit of the fluff came off in his ear. My wife spent 12 hours not being seen. This dude shows up to the ear with an urgent care complaint at best and gets in. Story 67. A guy came in with a head pain during Halloween. He was dressed like a clown, super drunk. And during the time he was getting a CT scan, one of the tech jokingly called him a clown and he got pissed. We had to call security. Best night shift I've ever experienced. Story 68. My dad told me about a college-aged kid that walked into the emergency department with a curtain rod that got stuck inside. When he came in, it was dragging on the ground behind him. Story 69. I came into the emergency department after midnight on a Saturday with a hit eyebrow. It was surprisingly slow that night, so basically everyone huddled into the room to see what was wrong with me. I told at least 20 people my dog had substances me into a door frame, but no one believed me. They all thought I must have been drunk and got in a bar fight or domestic dispute. As I was leaving, one guy asked, "What kind of dog do you have?" I said, "A 70-pound Siberian Husky." My fingers got caught in her collar as I was trying to lead her inside, and she pulled me right off my feet. Then there was a collective "oh" from the entire staff. I have a high center of gravity and a dog genetically built to pull things. Story 70. I don't work in the ear, but I went to high school with a girl named Paulina who tried to please herself with a hot dog. The hot dog broke and got stuck, and she ended up in air. And thus the name Paulina Weena was born. Story 71. Not proud of this story. But when I was about 19 years old, I drank an entire bottle of moonshine, blacked out, got into a fight with my stepdad. Cops got called. Thankfully, they only brought me to the emergency department to detox. I was in and out of it all night, but remember saying some pretty nasty things to the nurses. Woke up the next morning, went around and apologized to everyone. Thankfully, they understood and have seen worse. Had to walk home in the snow with no shoes, pajama pants, and a hospital blanket they gave me because I didn't have a shirt or jacket. Really nice people, and I give them a lot of credit for having to deal with drunken holes. Needless to say, I did a lot of thinking on that walk home. Story 72. My favorite nurse story came from my grandmother from the early 70s. She had to cut white bell-bottoms off a man because he had passed out from them being so tight, and she discovered that huge bulge was a keelbase of sausage. Story 73. Couldn't feel her heartbeat. Took me like 10 minutes in triage to figure out what the duck she was coming to the emergency department for. Turns out she legit thought her heart wasn't beating anymore because she couldn't feel a pulse by placing her hand over where she thought her heart was. I taught her how to actually check a pulse, and she still wanted to be seen by the doctor. She waited for about 6 hours before she finally left without being seen. All her vital signs were good, and she didn't have any other complaint. Yeah, you're not going to be seen anytime soon, lady. There's people with real problems here. Story 74. This guy came into the emergency department screaming that Christina Aguilera made him do it, completely unhinged. They take him back, thinking he's having some sort of psychotic break. My mom is the phlebotomist and takes his blood, and he looks her in the eyes and says, "Do you want to know what she made me do?" My mom, who is on her 4th graveyard 12-hour shift in a row, shrugs and says, "Hey!" With his free arm, he pulls down the waistband of his sweatpants. No undies, and his junk is dark purple from lack of circulation, and shoved into a glass soda bottle. He heard the song on the radio and thought it was Weenie in a Bottle. Story 75. My child points at teenager took some substances at a party a month ago. Don't know what substances, and they haven't had any symptoms, problems. But I demand you get the substances out of them. Same parent then phoned the parents of all the other teenagers at that party, of whom 6 or 7 turned up demanding we dialyze their, ostensibly perfectly healthy children to get the substances out. Story 76. A man came in with a mid-thigh laceration very deep. Turns out he was trying to make some jorts with the original pair of blue jeans still on. Story 77. Don't work in the emergency department, but once I had a strep throat and my fever spiked to 103 as an adult. My mom convinced me to go to the ER late at night, no walk-ins open. While I was waiting, A guy came in with his hand stuck in a pickle jar with his GF. He wanted to break it himself, and the nurse that was checking him in kept laughing, which caused me, in my feverish state, to also start laughing. It was so absurd, and I hope that guy got his hand out okay and learned to use a fork next time. Story 78. I had a young woman one night who had used a public restroom to poop. Apparently, some of the toilet water splashed onto her butt. She panicked, called the CDC, and came in with a list of recommended tests that be run to rule out any possible communicable diseases. Story 79. I had a late middle-aged married couple who thought for sure they had lost their sex toy in the wife's. When x-rays revealed nothing, I suspect they went home and found it hiding between the sheets or whatever. The whole humiliating affair had been for nothing. Story 80. Next-door neighbor thought he had a heart attack in the bathroom. I took him to the ER and we waited 5 hours. Then he had an x-ray. The nurse called me and asked me to recognize the dark spots on his abdomen area. Then he disclosed that it was solid crap, which was stuck to the walls, and he was only crafting water. Got a stool loosener, and that was that. Story 81. All right, I have a few, but I'll go with this one. Was while still working as a tech in nursing school. Guy drove from several counties away to come and visit our lovely ear. He needed an x-ray, had been feeling a ill frisky, and was using a sex toy. Went all the way in. He didn't want to go to a local ER, as his wife was a doctor there. Somehow, he thought it was going to just be some forceps to get it out or something. Nah, surgery was required. Wife notified anyway. Awkward. The end. Story 82. On a deployment, a guy was taking a crap in a porta potty and his nuts got stung by a scorpion. He got life flighted out to another base that had the antivenom. Never heard what happened to him. Story 83. Not me personally, but a friend worked in an ER and his favorite story was always the one about someone who came in with a horse sex toy fully inside them and completely stuck. Never elaborated further. Story 84. I was in the emergency department and a boy came in because he had stuck his arm down the drain in the shower and had gotten his arm stuck. His dad, or it might have been the firefighters, had cut out the bathtub and the drain pipe but couldn't get his arm out. So they brought him to the hospital with the pipe and piece of bathtub still around his arm. All the emergency department staff were coming over to take a peek at this little boy with the arm stuck in the pipe and running off giggling. Story 85. I was in a hospital for a concussion, and the guys in the next screening room over were in because one of them crashed a snowmobile into an electric fence. Seems a good reason enough to go to emergency department. Saw that his first friend was being electrocuted, pulled him off the fence, and then to get the other guy to laugh, decided to grab the fence himself to show it wasn't a big deal. Second guy lost half his ear. Story 86. Not me, one of the other doctors on the same shift. Examined a young man came in with a painful rash on his nether regions. This doctor, female, is very attractive. The poor little bloke came to full attention and released the troops on her scrubs while she was examining him. I took over a few minutes later. I've never seen a white person turn that shade of red without bursting capillaries. Story 87. I had a buddy that had to answer the call of nature while hiking out west, America. Being from the east, he was not very knowledgeable about the local plants, so of course he wiped his butt with poison sumac. That put him out of commission for a week of so. Story 88. I went in as a patient one summer night. The Boy Scout convention was in town, and a number of the adults had a hiking accident. There is nothing funnier than seeing a waiting room full of grown men in scout outfits. Story 89. Crazy stuff happens all day and night long, but the most absurd one that comes to mind was a man coming in very concerned about feeling hot, sweating a lot, and reddened skin. It was hot AF in the middle of summer that day. Story 90. The other day, we had a guy come in with a massive sex toy stuck where the sun don't shine. Nothing unusual about that in the air. We see it all the time. The twist is, Mom and Dad are snickering and tell the nurse. It's actually an exact copy of his father's junk that we had lying around and forgot about. My first thought was, okay, why would you tell us that, poor kid? Story 91. This was during a night call. We had someone come in with a light bulb in his mouth. When asked later what made him do it, he said he was drinking with some friends and how the topic of, you can insert a light bulb in your mouth but can never take it out, came about. And next thing you know, he got curious. He wasn't the only one that night. His pals and the taxi driver who initially brought him in had the same case because they got curious. Story 92. Mother brought her 19-year-old son at 2 a.m. because he went to the gym for the first time in his life and now has sore arms. Other guy had a complicated elbow fracture, claimed it happened during push-ups. Guy looked like he barely knew what a push-up is. Confides in a nurse that actually he was pleasure himself, and when he came, threw his arm out weirdly and hit the doorframe hard. Story 93. Not a nurse, but my wife is. Last year, she had a guy come in because he stuffed a Star Wars toy up inside. It was so far up that it had to be surgically removed. He also ended up having pandemic and forced the whole ward into isolation. Story 94. Alligator bite. I have worked and lived in Florida for 4 years now, and only seen one gator in person in a swampy park since I live in one of the major cities. Got a job in a more rural area about an hour north of my home, and sure enough, there it was. I thought it was hilarious more in the sense of, oh, it actually happens. Story 95. Don't work in the emergency department. But my mom did. Some guy came in and had hit through the webbing of his thumb. But that isn't actually the reason he came in. Turns out he had had a heart attack. Story 96. My mom was an emergency department nurse for a couple of years before she changed positions. She had one patient come in with gonorrhea. He said it itched when he peed, so naturally he put a pipe cleaner up inside to try to clean it out. Of course, it was so painful when he tried to pull it out that he has to be given local anesthetic before my mom could pull it out. Story 97. There was once a mom and daughter brought in because mom forbade daughter from having seconds of spaghetti. Daughter flipped out and put mom through a glass coffee table. Story 98. Infant started crying and the dad happened to be driving by, so came in to figure out why the baby was crying. Baby stopped crying once I started interacting with her. Baby had nothing. Story 99. Once had a woman super glue her eyes shut. In the middle of the night, she mistook the bottle for eye drops. But the best part is that it was in both eyes. Not only did she make the initial mistake, but she also had a moment of this is probably fine and did the second eye. Wild. Story 100. I don't work at the emergency department, but I went in once for a really dumb reason. I thought my appendix was bursting. I had excruciating side pain and could barely stand up. Friend drove me to the emergency department, and while I was waiting for the doc to come in, I ripped the biggest fart of my life and instantly felt better. I just left and didn't say anything. Story 101. Had a patient transferred over to our neurological observation unit in the emergency department from another ear. So the patient had been checked once already. They had a headache that the patient themselves rated a 2 on the numeric pain scale. We have no idea why they ended up there at all. Pain meds and observation for 6 hours, neurosurgeon did a 1 over and then home. Story 102. Patient came in at 3 a.m. because he ate a bowl of cucumbers and didn't burp. He always burps after eating cucumbers, and he was very concerned he hadn't yet. Story 103. I've got 2. 1. A woman brought her 8-year-old son in because his lips were chapped too. A man wanted to get clearance to fly to St. Louis because he had slept badly the night before. He wasn't the pilot. He was just a passenger. Story 104. Guy comes in with something jammed up inside. After a very painful extraction, the invasive object turns out to be this weird sculpture-like thingy. It appears to be a guy standing before a microphone, but now get this. It's made from fusilli pasta. 1,000,000 to 1 shot. Story 105. This answer will always be foreign objects inside. It's just a matter of which is the funniest object to find in someone's ass. And if anyone has x-rays of it that they can share, but only x-rays. Please no full-color photographs, thanks. Story 106. Stuck a firework up inside, then lit it. He was neither drunk nor on substances. It was New Year's Eve, and apparently he and his mates thought it would be funny. No word on whether he was trying to start his year with a bang. Story 107. A woman comes in, somewhat fat, pregnant, and halfway through her delivery. I, a 20-year-old intern, sees her pass by on a stretcher going, I just cannot be pregnant. It is impossible. Well, sis, the baby popped out, so rest assured you did something approximately 9 months ago. Story 108. Taco grease overdose. The patient had made ground beef for tacos and neglected to drain the fat. They then ate the tacos and experienced gastrointestinal distress, as one would. They came to the emergency department for it. Yes, this was during pandemic. I snorted at the reason for visit. ER doctors. What's the stupidest reason you have seen someone come to the ER? I had a woman come in with a tiny shallow cut on her finger. She demanded to be seen and made such a huge fuss the nurse put her through to see me. I put a Band-Aid, although it did not even need that, on her cut and then sat back and asked her what was really going on. Turns out her daughter was passing of cancer. She and her husband had moved to the city, where they knew no one, to take care of her. The husband then had a fatal me while transferring the daughter out of bed. Then her son, her only other child, was killed by a drunk driver on his way home from his dad's funeral. All this happened in about a 2-week time period. Luckily, I was able to set her up with some supports and a family doctor for ongoing care. Sometimes a stupid reason is a cover-up for a much bigger problem. Story 2. First off, let me say that the emergency department has many flavors of idiots. They range from patients that try to use the ER as their personal pain medication pharmacy, to the idiot that's in critical condition because he and his buddies thought it was smart to jump off a building to grab onto a flagpole. As strange and out of the ordinary as these visits seem, they become normal to you after you start working in the ER. The stupidest reason I've seen someone come to the ER was one that involved the most delusional, blatantly disrespectful patient we ever had the displeasure of helping. Let's call this patient C. Now, CE was a repeat patient that felt entitled to use the ER instead of a primary care doctor because her husband was a huge donor to the hospital. She never hesitated to remind us about her husband whenever she visited. This meant that she visited for the most banal of reasons. Never anything more than a common cold, but that didn't matter to her. Her husband meant something to the hospital, so logically she did too. She had a strong sense of entitlement, demanding to be taken care of before patients that actually had life-threatening illnesses because of, well, her husband. Of course we took care of CE, only after the high-priority cases were already taken care of. She knew this, but she was rude and condescending to every employee at the hospital nonetheless. This went on for a while, until C made the mistake of pulling one of her stunts when Dr. L was on duty. Dr. L was pleasant to every employee at the hospital. However, every nurse could attest to his temper. On account of the shouting you could hear from the break room while he was having one of his daily shouting matches over the phone with his wife. Dr. L was not a man you wanted to make angry, as C soon found out. While looking over his patient's charts, Dr. L overheard one of the new nurses asking her colleagues how to deal with C's ridiculous demands. There is nothing more infuriating to hospital staff, physicians, and nurses alike than a patient that abuses the emergency department doctor. L turned bright red as he turned to face the new hire. I swear I saw Dr. L's jugular vein distend as he said, "I'll take care of this," emphasizing each syllable through a set of gritted teeth. Dr. L walked into C's room, where she awaited him with the biggest crap-eating grin I've ever seen. She thought she had won. The doctor finally came to take care of her wants and needs. This was not the case, however, as Dr. L slammed the door behind him and gave C the tongue lashing of a lifetime. Everybody in the ear sort of stopped what they were doing as they heard the muffled roars coming from C's room. The entire air wing was filled with Dr. L's bellowing voice. I could only pick out bits and pieces of what Dr. L was yelling, but most of it was Dr. L calling C out for daring to interfere with the staff when they were trying to save the lives of patients with actual life-threatening illnesses. After his tirade ended, Dr. L nonchalantly left C's room and returned to his computer to work on his patient's charts. The staff, despite being a little shaken up over what had just happened, continued on with their day. I wish I could say poor C was nothing more than shaken up, but that was not the case. I could only describe her affect as being similar to Percy Wetmore's after John Coffey expelled the sickness out of his mouth. And into Percy's in the movie, The Green Mile. Pale, visibly shaking, and taking very small, calculated steps, C left the ER, never to be seen by us again. Story 3. Worked security, police for an emergency department once, and here are a few, as listed on the board in the emergency department, pregnant and not sure how. She was looking the doctor straight in the eye when she said she'd never had sex, was a virgin, and couldn't possibly be pregnant. She was mid-20 and blood tests showed positive, not to mention she had a belly and was about 3 months along. Turns out she knew and was in denial and was hoping the doctor would agree with her. She looked like she just rolled out of the trailer park. Weird black stuff under fingernails. It was dirt. Seriously though, someone went to the mother ducking emergency department for an itchy ass. Attempted death. Swallowed 9 AA batteries on this one. I got to see the x-ray, pretty crazy. Attempted died woman swallowed 1 DD battery? I don't know how this is possible, but it happened. Apparently, she and the above patient, unrelated incident, were both from a psych ward and had access to batteries. A crazy woman once entered the emergency department when I asked her what she was coming in for. She whipped out her tits and screamed, "For D's mother ducker!" There were some big red open sores on her breasts. I'm no nurse, doctor, so I don't know if that was, and I didn't want to find out. She was crazy, legit crazy. And no, she was in no way, shape, or form pretty. The exact opposite. When she left out, she refused to take a gown or blanket and instead wandered into a downtown area with no shirt or bra on. I asked her if she knew that she was topless and offered a gown. She yelled, "Does it look like I give a care?" and wandered down the street. I notified local PD who picked her up. Glass bottle inside, classic Coke bottle stuck in the pooper. Story 4. When I did a rotation at Lehigh Valley Hospital, Allentown, they had the story that apparently made the paper because a woman came to the hospital because she stubbed her toe. However, when she called 911, they only sent out an officer to pick her up because it was in the middle of a snowstorm, and all the ambulances were busy with real emergencies since the roads were a nightmare. Well, she pissed and moaned and absolutely refused the indignity of being taken to the ER in a squad car for her stubbed toe. She had to wait a few hours, but they eventually took her. The emergency department treated her like crap, and she made the nightly news and looked like a total crap. A kid at a hospital I was working at came into by ambulance for a burning sensation on his junk because he was pleasure himself with shaving cream and caused some chemical irritation. Emergency department wouldn't take him home. I'm sure it was fun explaining to his mom why he had to pick him up from the ER for the diagnosis of skin chafing. Another kid, same kid's hospital, happened to fellow resident, not me, put peanut butter on his junk and offered it his German Shepherd. Yeah, you know where this is going. Let's just say this kid will never get ahead in life. No, wait, let's just say he's not a very good tipper. Okay, let's just call it what it is. He lost the glands off his junk. Too many stories to count for parents that bring their kids in for the dumbest crap ever, like a runny nose on a kid that is happy, feeding well, and having no problems other than boogers. And then they all bring in their other 5 children and want to all checked out just to be safe. Another time at a hospital in Michigan, this young couple, 117, 118, had a baby in high school that was 3 days old. They brought the baby in because his feet were blue. Not real blue like cyanotic, meaning inadequate blood flow, but like slightly purple because his toes were a little cold. That I honestly didn't mind because the baby was beautiful, and they were brand new parents who obviously didn't know the first thing about raising a child, which allowed me to give them a little education. At a children's hospital, I had a 6-year-old boy fake a seizure because his mom wouldn't let him stay up and watch Freddy Krueger. She yells from the hall, "Somebody please come in here, my boy is shaking." I run and I look at him with his eyes open and say, "Hey buddy, what's going on?" "Boy, I don't know, I'm just shaking." It was hysterical. It took everything not to just bust out laughing. The mother was obviously an idiot. Turns out this 6-year-old had seen more horror movies than me, which is where he learned what people look like when they seize or get possessed. My last stupidest reason is for pregnancy tests. This only happens with people on public aid. They don't want to pay $1 to get a pregnancy test at Dollar General, so they wait 75 minutes to get into an air to tell us about how they had sex with some guy 4 months ago, haven't had a period since then, have felt him sickness and wonder. "Doctor, do you think I might be pregnant?" All they want is a free pregnancy test. It's so frustrating and a huge waste of public tax dollars. They have no idea that coming there costs taxpayers hundreds of dollars just to save them $1. Story 5. Me. "How long have you had this back pain?" Patient. "About a year." Me. "What brings you to the emergency room tonight?" Patient. "There's nothing good on TV." True story. Story 6. As an Army combat medic, I've done a few rotations in basers. Best patient I ever had was someone who came in for hurt feelings. No crap. Someone yelled at her for being an idiot, and as a result, she felt faint and thought it was her worthy. Meanwhile, she was taking up a bed the dude in the waiting room, uncontrollably crapping himself, could have used. Story 7. This one is from my mom, who worked as an ear nurse when she was younger. The hospital she worked in was in a fairly rural area, so it wasn't unusual to see farmers or generally older people with little to no understanding of how the modern world worked. Rural France of the 80s, yay. Monday morning, a man in his late 70s arrives, his hand covered with a towel. So my mom go to take the towel off and his hand oozing pus. He said he did that with a garden tool. Now the stupid begin. "Mom, but when did you injure yourself exactly?" Old guy, "Friday in the evening. I covered it in tissues and towels all the weekend." Mom, "But why didn't you come earlier?" Him, "This place is closed in the weekend, isn't it? Isn't it?" She also once saw a farmer who kept his boots all the time, and I mean all the time. And when they took them off to put him in a shower, they found sprouted wheat between his toes. But that's not stupid, just absolutely disgusting. Story 8. Not a doctor, but a stupid reason I took my 8-month-old son in was he had a rash on his forehead and was a little sleepier than usual. Called a care line and they said to rush him down to Ed. I said, "Are you sure?" "It's nothing like meningitis, no fever, just rash and a bit tired." They said, go, yes." So I took him and his twin down and were triaged. Waited for 4 hours. No probs, obviously staff are busy and both twins. And staff were awesome. My son flirted his head off with everyone who walked past, and him and his sister quietly interacted and played. I was feeling horrible the whole time being there, but the nurse on the phone swore he must go straight to Ed. 4 hours later, saw a doctor who diagnosed cradle cap of the eyebrows. I felt like such a time wasting git. Story 9. Working as a nurse in community healthcare, one of my job duties was her diversion. Suffice to say, I saw a lot of stupider visits. At the top of the list. "My baby is crying." "Your baby is a damn baby, that's what they do." "Try feeding him." Earwax. Patient felt he had too much of it, wanted the doctor to clean it out. Pregnancy tests. So many pregnancy tests. One woman who was a frequent flyer was in there for a pregnancy test at least once a month. This seemed to be a trend among some of these going for more than a day without pooping. I had to have the "your digestive system slows down a bit with age" talk so many times it felt like Groundhog Day. There were a lot of substances seekers, a lot of people looking for doctor's notes for work, a lot of common colds and flus and other ailments that were appropriate for a consult in primary care. Probably the most frustrating part of my job, but it taught me a lot about how ducked up our healthcare system is, and the reasons our healthcare costs are so high. Most of the people I counseled had no idea what a primary care physician was and hadn't been to the doctor in years. It was crazy making. Story 10. I'm a recently graduated RN working as a nurse assistant for the time being. I had a patient last night whose chief complaint was, "When I fart, it takes my breath away." One of the better nursing notes I've come across. Story 11. I worked as a registrar in an emergency department for a few years. Not a doctor or nurse. Sorry, but one night a woman came in by ambulance because she was experiencing symptoms of a sinus infection. Or maybe it was a minor ear infection. She told me, as I was getting her info, that she had already been seen by a physician that day and had already received antibiotics and had taken 1 dose. She also told me that she would have taken a cab instead of calling an ambulance, but she had spent all her money on the video lottery machines. I have no recollection of whether or not she was insured or not, but it was so stupid it hardly matters. Also saw not one but two grown men come in for splinters. Just your regular run-of-the-mill splinter in the finger, not infected and fresh. One of those was on Christmas night, when the wait to be seen was 4 hours. They made that guy wait instead of removing it in triage like the other guy. I think it was petty revenge for wasting everyone's time on such a busy night. He was insured, though. Story 12. A family friend is a gastrodoc. Can't spell the technical term for crap. He's pulling a shift in the emergency department and a man and woman come in. Dude's in a lot of pain. He goes back for x-rays and it's discovered he has a light bulb inside. So our friend goes to the waiting room to talk to the woman, only to discover she's missing and has been replaced by the dude's wife. Awkward situation for all parties involved. Story 13. Not an ER do or nurse, but does an XEMT count? Stupid reasons I've seen people go the emergency department. The guy that called us in, screaming of pain. His gay lover standing looking shame-faced. Reason? Softball stuck inside. Yes, a softball. Or the kid who was trying to hammer two boards together, couldn't get it right. So loaded up dad's air gun and tried to use it. Nail missed the boards, but went through the knee he was holding the boards on. Story 14. Dude came in really worried about this bump on his face. Turns out to be a pimple. Of course, he was also schizophrenic and off his meds, so there's that. Story 15. I recently had to go to the emergency department. I'd been out drinking and I woke up in a daze around 4 a.m. and tried to drink some water out of my big plastic jug. Only I picked up the plastic jug of laundry detergent and took a big gulp, realized my mistake, and spat it out. Since I was still pretty drunk, I just fell back asleep. But I woke up around 7 and the detergent on my pillow had gotten into my eye. Since I was dealing with the mother of all hangovers, I smoked a bowl and passed out again. I woke up 2 hours later. My eye was excruciatingly painful and I could only see a blur out of it. Since it was a Sunday, only the ear was open and I had to get my buddy to drive me there. The nurses laughed in my face when I told them what happened. To be fair, I would have laughed if some idiot had drunkenly mistook a laundry detergent jug for their water bottle and nearly blinded themselves. It takes a special kind of stupid to be me sometimes. Story 16. Some guy didn't crap for like a month and was terribly constipated. Some redneck deathmatch wrestlers decided it would be a good idea to throw one another through a burning table. Guy who went through the table got his clothes set on fire. He didn't get burned too badly, though. Just some second-degree burns. But whoever ran the wrestling event decided to stop the match, as the guy already bleeding profusely. He was already bleeding profusely because during death matches, they hit each other with light tubes, throw each other through panes of glass, and use other weapons on each other. Apparently, he got cut really bad after he went through some glass, but they decided to continue the match. Because he was wrestling around on shards of glass, he had like dozens of small cuts too. Talk to the guy, and apparently second-degree burns and dozens of small cuts earns you $10. Story 17. Guy calls for an ambulance to go to the hospital because he has excruciating back pain. We drop him off, and while in triage he tells the staff he doesn't have pain, he just knew if he went to the ED, they would call him a Medicaid. Or is it Medicare taxi so he could go to a pharmacy and get his pain med prescription filled? This is why our healthcare system is ducked. Story 18. While not to topic, I think my stupidest reason for an emergency department visit has most of you beat. As I got out of bed a few months ago, my neck made a crack that was loud enough to wake the baby. My wife got scared about how loud it was and convinced me to go to the emergency department. After a thorough exam and an x-ray, the doctor's opinion, the bodies of men in their 40s make noises, sometimes loud, a complete waste of time. I apologized profusely and left feeling like a git. Story 19. This is actually a tough question because they all start to blend in after a while. We'll see a few dozen people with colds, seasonal allergies, vomited once, stubbed their toe, excessive earwax, rashes that have lasted a week, etc. every night. What sets them apart in terms of stupidity is whether they can wait patiently to be told to go home, or whether they need someone to tell them to go home right now, like the aforementioned stubbed toe guy, hobbling over to me every 15 minutes to ask if they've moved from 12 people ahead of them to 11. No mother ducker. You've gone from 12 to 15 because of the 3 78-year-olds with abdominal pain you saw me talking to since the last time you got up. The art of triage is often about subtly giving a person the notion that they may be more comfortable, and in fact safer, convalescing their trivial complaint at home. If they think you think they're a git, you're going to have a bad time. If they think you have empowered them to courageously tackle their ailment without the assistance of a massive team of licensed and experienced professionals, very little can go wrong for you. Of course, if your assessment sucks, and they're passing you and the patient are both screwed. Story 20. I'm a dentist. A couple of years ago, I was doing my hospital residency. It was a small community hospital. Didn't really see much trauma other than kids who fell or got hit by a ball and knocked a tooth loose. Except for the guy who cut half his face off with a chainsaw. Yeah, But the stupid ones were when people would come to the ER for a toothache. They'd come in if it was during the week, they'd get sent to our clinic and hopefully get it taken care of. Sometimes, though, people would go to the ER in the middle of the night or on a Sunday or something, and whoever was on call would have to go in and basically say, "You need a root canal, but I can't do it right now because it's 1 a.m. and there's nobody to give me a hand. So here's some antibiotics and please come back to the clinic in the morning." The most I'd do in the ear is drain an abscess. Some people either don't go to the dentist because they don't have insurance or have an incredibly strong fear of the dentist. They'd let something hurt for months and months until it started causing a nasty swollen abscess. I come in and drain it. They never come back to get a definitive treatment. Then they're back in the emergency department in a week when it swells up again. Story 21. Well, I was the patient in this case. Stomach pains really intense. I wonder how many of them thought I was full of crap. Turns out I literally was. I was constipated. Story 22. Too many years in her as RN and also as an IC paramedic to list a lot of the stupid things. But best one that pops to mind is the rectal pain. And oh, the patient was missing his mobile. Yep, we found it. Right up there. Funny it was set to vibrate only. And yes, Doc had gloves on to check that. The best line was from the patient. Guess I won't be using that phone again. Working in this environment was amazing. I'm out of it now, as you do make a real difference to people's lives. But you also must have an incredible sense of humor to cope with everything as well. The good, the tragic, the uplifting, and of course the crazy. One thing I learned early was that even though there are time wasters, not real emergencies in any way, shape, or form cuts, headache, or the good old coughs, colds, and runny holes, out there, really just take 5 minds, make them a cup of tea, and have a quick chat. Hold their hand if they seem scared, etc. Make a massive difference in their world. And you know what? Sometimes it makes your own day a whole lot better too. Story 23. Nurse here. I hope this thread isn't discouraging anyone from visiting the ER if they think they need to. We will totally judge you, but that's part of our job. I'd rather 100 people come to the emergency department over trifles than miss one person who decided to stay home and then crumps. Story 24. Not a doctor or a nurse, but a patient that experienced firsthand just how self-centered these people can be. I had a snowboarding accident a few months ago and broke my spine. This was pretty late in the evening, and it was a tiny emergency department. I live in a tiny country, so everything is kind of tiny too as a result. And only 3 doctors were on duty. 2 of them had totally legit cases. Someone with pneumonia and a girl who had passed out and hit her on something. And then there was this lady that had a rash on her arm. She was next room to me, and I could hear her yelling at the doctor and freaking out over something that turned out to be caused by mild allergic reaction. She held the doctor for damn 20 minutes while the nurses did the best they could to make me as comfortable as possible while I was in excruciating pain. If I could have stood up, I would have punched this lady. Story 25. My time to shine. Not my story, but my dad's colleague. He is a surgeon. There is this story going around in my town's manor, and this guy's is supposed to be someone who only met this patient. So, the story that this guy was waxing his floor. It's summer and hot. He's on his knees and wearing very short shorts. And as he is waxing, his balls swang. His cat note cases, and as do the furry duckers do, scratches the poor dude. He proceeds to bang his head on the metal heater, and I'm not sure if it's called like that, but may, and hit his forehead. 40 minutes later, as the guys at the ER are carrying him on a hospital bed, they hear out his story and laugh so hard they drop them on the stairs. He breaks both his arms. Poor guy, that must have been one of a bad day. Story 26. One time I took my daughter to the ER because she had a dime up her nose. While we were there, we heard the staff discussing a guy who was there because he had swallowed his ring. Story 27. A medical student here, but a 5 a.m. admission Sunday evening from emergency department because her pussy was itching. DR. How long have you been having this symptom? PT. 3 years. DR. When did it become worse? PT. Oh, it hasn't gotten worse. DDR. Do you mean to tell me that your pussy has been itching for 3 years and you just decided to come to the emergency room now? PT. Oh yes. I was bored and there was nothing good on TV. Got to love free healthcare. Story 28. Pregnant teenager comes in after being thrown from a moving car by her baby daddy. The dumb thing is that he had thrown her out, then demanded that she get back in, then took off at 25 miles per hour and proceeded to throw her out again. This time he ran over her leg. I'm sorry, but if the father of your child has no regard for your life or the life of your unborn child and pushes you out of a moving car, then I'm not getting back into the car. Story 29. In the emergency department, we overheard the paramedics saying someone called 911 to get a ride to the hospital via ambulance for getting shampoo in their eye. Needless to say, the paramedics denied their request. It's a privately owned company, so they can. Also, a man came in with a folded-up umbrella up inside of him. Story 30. Prob when people come in with objects lodged in inside, and then they say, I accidentally tripped and fell on it. One guy came in with a Christmas candle wrapped in saran wrap stuck where sun doesn't hit. A Christmas candle. The large, 3-wick ones. Story 31. I'm reading the triage note, and the chief complaint is, I think I have hypothermia. As I look up from the computer, I see this patient walking casually by with his jacket unzipped. The nurse rooms him, and he promptly asks for a sandwich and makes himself comfortable. And yes, he's a frequent flyer. No, he wasn't a homeless guy looking for warmth and food, and it was probably 50 degrees outside that day. Story 32. I'm not a doctor or nurse, but I've been to the emergency department for some stupid injuries. 1. I hit my hand on a rusty metal broom handle while sweeping the floor at work. The broom handle just sort of buckled, twisted apart, and hit my hand open. I needed a tetanus shot, so my boss made me go to the emergency department. Doc asked, "How'd you do this?" I responded, "Sweeping the floor." He laughed. 2. I was trying to pull a retractable iPod tethering cord, or whatever they're called, out from under a pile of textbooks, and the sharp end snapped back and hit me directly in the eye. Had to go to the emergency department for that too. Ended up having 2 small slices. Told the doc what happened. He laughed. Story 33. Some kid put Bengay on his junk for a dare and had an allergic reaction to it. It was 3 a.m. when I got the call. My nurse and I gave him a very stern lecture. Story 34. A few years ago, when my daughter was on Medicaid, we only had one option of doctor to take her to, and they kept telling me she has a touch of bronchitis maybe, or just a bad cold. It will pass. But she was crazy sick, and the antibiotics had no affect after the 10 days. Nothing ever helped. Fevers never went down long enough, and her doc would only rewrite the same script. I took her to the emergency department 6 times that year for a cold. Each time she had to be rehydrated and get IV antibiotics. The last time, she was the sickest. Her lips were even blue. She had pneumonia, though her PCP said it was just a cold and Santa had to come to the hospital that year. Story 35. Working at triage, I regularly heard stories to this effect. I have an ear, chest, throat infection. I went to my GP this morning and got antibiotics. I've taken a couple, but I still feel poorly. Enjoy your 6-hour wait to be told that you're an idiot. Story 36. A frozen hot dog that thawed and broke off in a female patient's pussy and couldn't get it out. Watched an ear doc spend 20 minutes with tweezers fishing pieces out. Broken junk. Wife said he was a little too rambunctious during intercourse. Story 37. Had a college-age student come into my ed via ambulance for a sunburn. First degree to back, chest, neck, fronts of legs, and face. He had spent the weekend tubing a river while drinking and had drunk, forgot to put on sunscreen, later passing out in the Texas sun. I've also treated many ingrown toenails. Many who have vomited once but felt fine after. My child felt warm. No other symptoms. Family did not own a thermometer. My PCP couldn't see me for X weeks. So I decided to come here. I need an MRI, but there were no available appointments for X weeks, months. I need a prescription refill. I ran out X weeks ago. Story 38. I review a lot of medical records for my job, and am frequently flabbergasted at the clisted honor visits. Shoulder that was dislocated several years ago and treated. I think I broke my smallest toe. My neighbor told me I'm diabetic. It's not as entertaining as the self-diagnosed ailments, though. Story 39. Myself. Actually, I called my doc because I'd been having heartburn when eating. Essentially, I just wanted to see if it was appropriate to take heartburn medication with the other prescriptions I take. I know darn well my heart is fine. He'd given me an ERG himself about a month prior, and it was fine. He freaks out and orders me to the emergency department. I say to myself, no, this is not an air situation. Let me go to the local walk-in clinic. Walked out with a sample pack of Prilosec. Pleased to say I didn't piss off an air doctor and my heartburn is no longer an issue. Story 40. My sister-in-law was a nurse in a consistently busy emergency room in a decent-sized city. She told me about this time that a doctor who was finishing his residency at the same hospital came in with a silver ring stuck on his junk. This was a ring meant for a finger, not a penis. Funniest thing is he had to come back to work on Monday and face all of the nurses and other staff that knew what he came in for. Story 41. I had a woman in her 30s show up in the emergency department, with her mother no less. Because during sex, she suddenly had a rushing sensation, followed by muscle contractions and twitches on her whole body. Formed tongue to toe, she said. I didn't know what to say. Congratulations on your first pleasure? Story 42. One time I went to the emergency department because my chest hurt. Really, really bad. Worse than anything I have experienced, I could not lie down, or laugh, or breath. It was under my ribs, a little below my heart. It had been going on for like 2 days. By the time I got into the room, it had passed for the most part. They said nothing was wrong. I felt like such in a hole and wasted $300. Story 43. I'm not a doc or anything, but I'm often reminded by my friends the stupid reason I went to the emergency department. While delivering pizza, I was walking back to my car and took the step off the curb. Weird. I heard a snap and fell and knew immediately I broke my leg. Had fallen on my phone, so I had to wait 10 minutes before someone luckily drove by and saw me. When I got to the emergency department and x-rayed, I found out my left tibia and fibula had an unstable fracture, and my right ankle was sprained bad enough to not be able to walk on it at all from a curb. Story 44. Back about 10 years ago, I worked with a guy we called Cinnamon. He was a redhead. So he went to the ER one night with a really bad earache, and while in the pre-exam room or whatever you call it, they looked in his ear. The nurse told him to hold on, and she came back with gloves and a Q-tip and started working on him. He had a huge infected pimple in his ear. They popped and fixed him right up. He did have very bad acne, so it would make sense that it would make it to his ear. He was pretty embarrassed about the whole thing. Story 45. In New Orleans, one guy kept coming in for jock itch and chapped lips. Pensacola. One lady just brought her kids in, all 5 of them, for a checkup about once a month. Leesville, LA. Back pain they had already seen their GP about, but it still hurt a little. Wanted substances and left Emma I offered them an I'm Toradol shot. Another lady had road rash on her knee from someone pushing her out of an idling car. I got cussed out for not giving her emergency department and not paying her any attention when we were literally coding the person in the next bed. Same night. Story 46. Tech here. Got some. Lady thought she had a blood clot in her hand. It was a bruise. Girl cut herself in her ass from shaving her ass hairs. Kid was experiencing chest pain while playing World of Warcraft. He said he was having trouble getting past a certain level, and he was getting anxious. Lady came in because she didn't feel right. Lounged around for about 15 mins. Said she had to sit on a commode. Missed her target and proceeded to crap all over the floor. Stretcher herself. That wasn't fun. People are idiots. Story 47. My roommate is an tech, and he works in a sort ghetto, white trash hospital, and has told me some gems. This one woman comes in all the damn time for routine checkup stuff. Like she comes into the emergency department once a month to get her substances refilled. He also says people constantly come back in faking pain in order to get narcotics. They even request the strong stuff that's usually reserved for extreme cases of pain. When they're denied pain meds and offered non-substances meds, they just leave. Story 48. I'm a hospital corpsman stationed on a ship. Last week, I treated someone with a neck injury. When I asked her what happened, she told me she was at the bottom of a stairwell, and another sailor said her name from the top and somehow strained her neck by looking up at them. Story 49. I had a girl come into my emergency department for a pregnancy test. When asked if she had taken one from a substances store, she said, yes, and it was positive, but the lines faded away after a few hours, so I'm not sure I'm really pregnant. She wanted a blood test to be sure. We handed her a cup, told her to pee in it, and then dipped a pregnancy test in it. She was pregnant, and she got a lecture on how pregnancy tests work. Story 50. My friend is a nurse, and during her training, a guy was brought in by ambulance to the ER. Although he needed seeing, he gave the stupidest reason for it. He told her he'd been in the shower. And when he got out and was drying off, he sat in the armchair, but he hadn't noticed the empty jam jar there, and it slipped into his bottom, and he couldn't get it out. He was obviously too embarrassed to think of a better excuse than that. Story 51. Women come into the emergency department in suspicion that they are pregnant, not because they think they're ill and then end up being pregnant, because they want a pregnancy test. I bet most of them skip the bill on the end, using the emergency department as an expensive pregnancy test. I love telling this to people who are against Planned Parenthood and free healthcare. I wish women would use PIP instead of the ear. Crap. Even dollar stores carry pregnancy tests that are surprisingly accurate. Story 52. These are mostly great, but a lot of these idiots are only in the emergency department because they have absolutely no choice. They can't go to the regular doctor ever, so everything becomes either something to ignore or something you will have to wait 8 hours for help with. It's a crap choice. Story 53. Back during my ear rotation, a patient came to the emergency department because he had fallen on a fan while naked. So naturally, his penis was swollen and he was in a lot of pain. After careful examination and questioning, he finally admitted he was doing a dare that consisted in passing his junk between the blades of a fan in the highest setting without being hit. Story 54. Did a call, paramedic, to a house with an 18-year-old who had stubbed his toe and then called 911 and asked to be taken to the hospital. Wasn't even in pain when we got there. He was walking around. Later, the same night, called to a coffee shop for a lady who was hungry. Took her to hospital as well since she insisted. Story 55. My mom is an emergency department nurse. During the whole swine flu epidemic, some lady came in because she thought she had a cut that was going to get infected. The cut was nothing but a paper cut. The lady wouldn't leave for an hour until something happened. And this was all while a bunch of people were coughing their lungs out in the waiting room. Story 56. I don't work in the ear, but I used to process the paperwork that went from there back to physicians. The best reason for attendance I can remember was a direct result of plastic fish falling onto head. Story 57. Not me. But when I was in the hospital, I saw this woman that demanded to be sent to the ER because she hit herself, from what I overheard, thanks to my Assassin's Creed skills. She hit herself against some stairs. She was fine. No concussion or anything, but she and her friends demanded to be seen. I didn't know after that. They took some x-rays of my knee. Story 58. I just asked an error friend about this, and he had a great story. Apparently, a person splashed pool chemicals into his eyes by accident and asked his friend to look up what he should do on his phone. His friend proceeded to tell him that male ejaculate neutralized the chemicals. He came into the ER with his eyes caked up and asked why they still burned. Story 59. Had a kid come in complaining his finger hurt. Bear in mind it was 3 in the morning. I told him to change into a gown, or at least take off his sweatshirt so I could get vitals. Left and came back to this kid laying on the bed, charging his phone and watching the TV in the room. Story 60. Had an 18-year-old show up in the ER for a cold sore once. The kicker was, his mom was an ICU nurse and a friend. We called to let her know. She came down there and chewed him out in front of the whole lobby, then made him apologize to the staff for wasting our time. Story 61. Woman brought her 1-year-old and 3 years old in to be evaluated for a mosquito bite that afternoon. She brought them both in again a couple weeks later for another mosquito bite on one of them. Ridiculous. Story 62. Pregnant woman comes in twice to Ed for ultrasound. Wants to know dates so she can inform one of the 2 candidates he's going to be a daddy. Sent her for prenatal care both times. Also an elderly woman who couldn't hear. Ears full of wax so hard we couldn't remove it. Story 63. I had a nightmare. PT called 911 and was transported in an ambulance to my emergency department. Next time you are at an emergency department, this is why you're waiting to see a doctor and a nurse. Emergency departments are being used as doctor offices, urgent cares, homeless shelters, drunk tanks, attic supplier, and babysitting idiots. ER, doctors of Reddit. Which of your patients came the closest to winning a Darwin Award? One of my patients came in with 2nd and 3rd degree burns, all the way up his right arm. It was winter, and his pickup wouldn't start, so he put a match in the gas tank to melt the frozen gasoline. Story 2. One of my patients, male in his 30s, tried to follow a healthy trend and made a medium-rare chicken recipe. Results? Severe amoebic dysentery and colitis. Story 3. I was junior anesthesia trainee. I treated a man who injected poppy juice into his radial artery. He almost lost his hand, and he required multiple plastic surgery procedures. A few months later, old mate is back in theater for a repair of the other side of his forearm. He has been riding a bicycle holding onto an idling chainsaw with his other arm. He was riding around cutting down letterboxes. He slipped and chains awed the good side of the arm he injected poppy juice into. Then there was the youth, who saw what he thought was a snake. He went to confirm by picking it up, and it bit him. He remained curious, so he picked it up again and was bitten again. We live in an area of Australia where every snake is venomous. Story 4. Burns are fun. 1. Decided the gas in the car was dead and threw a few gallons on a bonfire to get rid of it. Spent a month in the burn unit. When he woke up, he told his elderly dad to go ahead and burn the rest of that old gas out back so we can get the car started. I had a long conversation with him. 2. A man jumped chest first into a fire pit. Miraculously, he was saved by his friends with seemingly minor injuries and then immediately turned around and jumped back into the pit. 3 months in the burn unit. Story 5. A patient with a methamphetamine addiction attached a Jubilee clip to the base of his junk as a junk ring and then promptly forgot about it for several days before presenting to the ED with a severely vascularly compromised junk. He hadn't even come in because of that, though. It was an incidental finding when undressing him for a secondary survey after he fell from a roof and broke his ankle. We also have very frequent patient presentations, 6 per week, having missed dialysis for 2 weeks and returning scarily high potassium levels. Story 6. Anecdote from Navy corpsman attached to Marines. Marine goes to the admin medic on duty. Doc, what's bothering you, Marine? Marine 1. I have a scorpion sting. Doc, okay, where? Marine 1. On my nutsack. Doc. Okay, have a seat over there. Next. What brings you here, Marine? Marine 2. I have a scorpion sting. Doc. Okay, where? Marine 2. On my nutsack. Doc. Hold on. You, other Marine. Come here. Marine 1. Yes, Doc? Doc. You both have scorpion stings? Marine 1. Roger, Doc. Doc. On your nuts. Marine 2. Roger, Doc. Doc. Why? Marine 1. We were bored, and I had caught a scorpion earlier. We had a contest to see who could get stung in the nuts the most without quitting. Marine 2, beaming with pride. I won. Story 7. Not in ed, but hematology. We called a guy and told him to come in yesterday afternoon because his routine blood tests before clinic were extremely abnormal, and we needed to start him on urgent treatment. He didn't come in until today because it was raining yesterday. He's now very unwell. Story 8. Myself, honestly. I got put under with an IV, and afterwards, they tried to help me into a wheelchair. Damn that, I don't need a chair, I slurred as I ate crap. Story 9. The one that is a near miss, I can think of off the top of my head, modded the electronics on a vape, causing the lithium battery to explode in the right front pocket of his pants, resulting in an extremely severe burn, about 1 to 1.5 feet in diameter, and burned his hand completely below the wrist since it was in his pocket. Had his pants been a little baggier or his pocket been a little deeper, his boys would have been thoroughly roasted or detached. Story 10. I volunteered at a hospital, and while on air duty, a guy was brought in by 5 cops. The genius attempted to rob the school where cops get trained for guns. If you've ever seen one, you've noticed all the guns are bright red and made of rubber. He parked a van up against the building and cut the wire cover off the window. When that didn't work, he walked along the top of the fence, with his hands on the wall trying to get to an overhang. He was spotted, and while the guns may be fake, the dog wasn't. Story 11. Have a couple one? Guy came in with his junk in a beer bottle. Apparently he fell on it and then got hard so he couldn't get it out. Sure, buddy. 2. Drank bleach on a dare. Genius friend gave him an alkaline, can't remember what. Thing is, when you neutralize acids with alkaline, there's heat, a lot of heat, burns along the esophagus IRC. Story 12. My grandpa was working in the air one time and somebody came in with 3rd-degree burns everywhere. The barbecue wasn't getting hot fast enough, so he dumped some gasoline on it. Story 13. I had a guy get voluntarily defibrillated. Let's just say he was a Mountain Dew type of guy, and he probably isn't long for this world anyway. Our conversation yielded some comical answers for all the wrong reasons. Story 14. Not a doctor or EMT, but my brother-in-law once poured gas on a pile of brush, then tried to light it with his Bic. Luckily, it blew him backwards, and he only suffered from complete loss of all facial hair and what looked a bad sunburn. Story 15. According to the doctor in my life, don't stick random stuff up inside. We get these guys in the ER all the time, and we hate having to fist them to get it out. Story 16. I was a scribe in the ER. We saw a patient who had been drinking and started to feel nauseated while in the car. Her daughter, who was driving, said something like, "You better not throw up in my car." So this lady, who apparently wasn't wearing a seatbelt, had the great idea to open the door while on the highway to throw up. Story 17. A guy arrived at the ER after he ate a few pounds of cherries without spitting the stones, so he had to be operated to get them out. The chief doctor came to see the x-ray while the man was being prepared for surgery and said, "Good thing he didn't eat peaches." Story 18. Not quite Darwin Award. Still dumb. A patient I was involved in caring for decided to see if he could fix the noise in his running lawnmower by putting his fingers under the guard to clear the blockage. A few cuts later, that didn't work. Decided to try it again, lost 2 fingers. Story 19. I think this question might be better suited for MS. I was in Middle Tennessee working MS, only been out there 6 months, so I was very unfamiliar with the area and the kinds of people that inhabited the towns. My bus gets dispatched to chemical burns at Walmart. Upon arrival, we enter the store, and I asked the manager that was waiting for us, "Where is the pool section?" Being from Florida, I assumed some dum-dums were messing around with the pool cleaning products. He looked at me very confused and responded with, "Out at the end of the parking lot." My partner and I hop back in the ambulance and drive to the back corner where we see a 4-door sedan with the trunk open. 2 white males slumped over, one on the ground with his back against the back tire, and the other laying head first out of the back seat. I smelt something very odd as soon as my door was opened. Stepped out, and before I took my first step, my partner says, "Get back in the bus now." Turns out there too were cooking met in the trunk of their car, and it exploded. Partner called hazmat, and they took it from there. Story 20. Here encountered a man who decided his electric bill was too high, so he turned off all the heat in his house. Giant snowstorm came and dumped about 3 feet of snow in less than 2 days. Dude thought he might have frostbite on his toes. He did, actually. So to warm himself up, he drank an entire gallon of antifreeze. Apparently, the name is misleading. He thought it would unfreeze him, put himself into acute renal failure, and spent 6 weeks getting inpatient dialysis, among other things, before he was released. Story 21. Today, I had a patient with a head injury having fallen out of a tree. He was trying to climb said tree to fetch his shoe after he made a sober bet he could throw his own shoe over the tree. Dude was in his 40s. He lost the bet, his shoe, and won a concussion. Story 22. Medical student here. I was in the ER when someone with a broken light bulb inside. The story was they were changing the lights, and it was on the floor, and they fell on it. Story 23. I had this one idiot who punched through a glass coffee table because his stupid football team won the Super Bowl. Mother Ducker ruined my night. Damn hand was a pain in the ass to stitch. To top it off, his GF was there and totally freaked out by the incident. Thus, she wanted to break up with him. And this guy became an emotional wreck and started crying when he realized. He kept leaving the room to talk to his girl or calling her on the phone while I'm trying to take care of him. On top of that, he had to repeatedly get x-rays because despite washing his hand, there were still glass remaining. And he was extremely impatient due to this. At one point, he wanted to walk out, hand ducked up and all. I didn't care if he left. I had other patients to worry about. His GF, however, convinced him to stay. I have never met an idiot of that degree in my life, and I hope I never meet him again. He deserves the Darwin Award. Story 24. My mom used to work in a hospital. She used to tell us horror stories of patients. We had a massive ice storm one year, and power was out for weeks. One family decided to keep warm by bringing their grill inside the house. All 4 family members had carbon monoxide poisoning. They were very lucky to survive. Story 25. I have a coworker with an addiction, and one lie he uses to cover up being high all the time is that he is sick or doesn't feel well. He once went to the ER 6 times in 2 months to try to make his excuses seem legit to his girlfriend. Thousands of dollars of debt. Later, they are still together, and when she sees him high as crap, he says something like, "I have the flu." Darwinism. Story 26. Nurse. I had a meth addict come in after he and his buddy tried to make homemade landmines with pipes and gunpowder to protect his weed grow. The landmine blew up in his hand. Story 27. Had a man in his late 60s present with no bowel movement in 7 days. You know this is going to be bad. Expected impacted bowel. It was impacted all right. Radiology showed an inverted 12 ounces bar glass inside. Story 28. Not a doctor, but an MTI. I'm going to go with the patient who was at a bonfire with friends and fell into the fire. His blood alcohol level was 0.28. He was also on seizure medication. 3rd-degree burns to his entire left arm, 1st and 2nd to his abdomen and leg, during the 2-hour, 20-minute ride to the burn center, resulting in a heart rate of 42. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Story 29. I was playing with alcohol and fire, like plastic bottle rockets, whoosh bottle, and jet jars. Well, one day I had to take off the welding glove to tighten the base of the gas rocket, then I fire it. At the moment, I clicked the spark plug button. I realized I was missing a glove, and I saw like a slow motion of the skin in my hand turning red-brown and ripple over itself before feeling any pain. Story 30. I'm only an MET, but it's the same story as an ear doctor. A guy standing on a ladder trimming his tree with a weed whacker. Great learning experience when I, as a new EMT, because he had virtually every kind of skin injury you can imagine. Story 31. A patient undergoing telemetry for preoperative assessment for epilepsy had electrodes implanted in their brain subdurally. Patient got bored after 2 weeks or sitting around doing nothing with no seizures, and so pulled them out. Amazingly, there were no sequelae. Story 32. Had a gentleman do substances while on the job at a construction site. Apparently started falling asleep and propped his head up with the business end of a nail gun, with his finger in the trigger. Survived, relatively unharmed. Story 33. Obligatory not a doctor, but a witness. Watched my dad hold his scotch in one hand and steady a piece of wood in the other so my 7-year-old brother could use a full-size axe to split the wood. They were able to reattach my dad's finger, but he's never had much use of it. Story 34. Story from my mom, who was an ear nurse practitioner. A man came in with his junk stuck in a mini grill. Apparently him and his wife were doing some ultra crap, and when circulation cut off to his junk, the end of it that was stuck in the grill inflated to the size of a water balloon, so they had to saw the grill off. Story 35. My aunt and uncle worked her for years until they retired. One of my uncle's favorite stories was about an obese gentleman who tossed his rifle out of his truck window during deer season. The rifle went off and shot him through the door of the vehicle. The bullet entered the love handle on the left side and traveled around his back and stopped in the fat on the right side. My uncle said he removed a bewildering amount of truck door from inside the wound before he even managed to get to the bullet. Story 36. Not a doctor, but my dad is, and he often tells me about all the odd patients he encounters. Here's one of them. A young man comes into the ER complaining that his heart was racing every time he worked out over the last 2 months. The man says that it takes 10 minutes for his heart to slow down once he stopped exerting himself. My dad stared at him blankly and then reassured him that this was because he was performing aerobic exercise and would get used to it if he continued exercising.